Let's be clear about something from the start. 007 First Light is not woke, and the evidence for that is right there in the history of the franchise itself. James Bond has never been static. The series has always shifted with the times, sometimes subtly, sometimes more aggressively, but always with the same core intact. This is a franchise that phased out Bond's constant smoking,
Filthy habit.
introduced a female M in the mid-90s, then also steadily reframed Bond women as equals, rivals, and moral counterparts, rather than set dressing. None of that was labeled woke at the time. It was simply Bond staying relevant. And that context matters when people fixate on the phrase modern values. According to the article, the cinematics director explicitly states that Bond will still be smooth, still charming, and when he was asked directly, he said still a womanizer. And that detail is often omitted in the reaction cycle, but it's essential. The concern isn't that Bond is being stripped of his identity. The concern is whether outdated behavior is being confused with defining traits.
Behave yourself, Mr. Bond.
As much as I love the era, like some Connery moments, like Bond's treatment of Pussy Galore and Goldfinger, aren't that comfortable to watch. To me, they're a little too blunt and they don't enhance Bond's masculinity. They reduce it. And let's be real, removing that isn't sanitizing the character, it's refining him. Bond has always been at his strongest when his confidence, danger, and sexuality come from presence, not coercion. Pierce Brosnan's Bond is the clearest example of that balance. He was a womanizer, he was seductive, and he was unapologetically masculine. But he was also controlled, charming, and aware of the power dynamics in the room. And so far, everything I've seen described about First Light points in that direction. Whether that be the trailers or the press releases, there's nothing concerning there. Now let's address the broader fear. The idea that this game is woke. That argument collapses when you look at the complete difference between other projects driven by ideology and politics. The games that are driven by social messaging rarely hide it. They always put it front and center. They pause the narrative to explain themselves. They want to sit there and tell you exactly how to think. Like I said, nothing I've seen shown or stated about First Light suggests that approach. Like, from what I've seen so far, it's a project structurally rooted in Hitman, with a Bond written as a womanizer, a charmer, and a physical threat. I see nothing of virtue signaling or any identity politics. And that quote that sparked all the outrage online feels less like activism and more like caution, a follow-up clarification after earlier comments likely raised concerns internally. And it's not evidence of a creative overhaul. It's also important to separate skepticism from assumption. Being cautious when studios talk about modernizing characters is reasonable. There are dozens of examples where modernization becomes dilution. But honestly, nothing I've seen here indicates that whatsoever. Judging by everything I've seen so far, Bond is masculine, capable, self-assured, and fully willing to break bones when necessary. That is not a rejection of Bond's identity, that's just a continuation of it. As he always does, James Bond survives because he evolves. And he does so selectively, deliberately, and with an understanding of what actually defines him. First Light doesn't look like a franchise apologizing for its past. It looks like one that knows exactly which parts of the past are worth carrying forward, and that distinction does matter. There's also an uncomfortable reality that needs to be acknowledged here. A segment of YouTube has spent nearly a decade making a living off of a perpetual woke witch hunt, sniffing for ideological contamination anywhere they can find it. And now that reflex is being applied to a franchise and a community they don't understand. Politics have never been the central concern of the Bond fandom. The series has always been progressive in a natural way, which is precisely why it avoided the massive culture fractures seen everywhere else. Bond fans argue about films and performances, about tone, villains, pacing, and eras, not about partisan politics. Targeting First Light the same way people targeted Saints Row or The New Dragon Age isn't fair. Not to the studio, and more importantly, not to the Bond fans. The franchise needs this game to succeed. Not for validation, but so more Bond games can exist in the first place. But if this game is good, the woke label won't matter, and never overshadows positive word of mouth. But I am disappointed in these people for ignoring the lack of telltale signs that this will be the kind of ideological slop that they fear. This game doesn't deserve bad press because of one manager in an interview who tried to save face and play both sides. Like, man, we haven't had a proper James Bond game in almost 15 years. Reducing that momentum to outrage over a couple words isn't principled, man, that's lazy. The behavior isn't meaningfully different from the cancellation mobs of a decade ago. You came into this fandom, we didn't want you here, we didn't need you here, and you're tearing the place up. That was never necessary. Thanks for watching, guys.